Pleasure to introduce our first speaker for this afternoon. Our first speaker is Dr. Quinn Lanzendorfer. Did I get it close? Lanzendorfer, sorry. Whose session is called Adaptive Acquisition Frameworks for Defense Information System. Now, Quinn is an author and a professor who's published in many areas, including knowledge management, which is my area of study, so I was delighted to see that, and of course, cybersecurity. So please join me in welcoming Quinn. So you've got that?
We won't shake hands?
No,
Okay.
No shaking hands.
Okay, so that's
Forward, right, that's it.
got it. Okay, hopefully you can hear me. I can hear me. Great. Fantastic. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name's Quinn Lanzendorfer. And judging by one of the presentations we saw this morning, we had somebody throw a bunch of numbers up there, and you had to remember it. So now you see my last name, that's kind of the same idea, right? It's like WTHF, whatever. Anyway, Dr. Spangler has been trying to get me down here for quite a while, I think 4 years now. So came in last night. Surprisingly efficient to get here through Contour Airlines from BWI. Very surprised. But anyway, Dr. Spangler, where is Dr. Spangler? There he is, back there. Dr. Spangler and I go way back. He was my wingman when we were doctoral students. So I don't know who has more dirt on the other, but we'll just leave it at that.
Actually, we have lots of time.
Fantastic. Anyway, like Dr. Spangler, I'm a Western Pennsylvania native, so go Steelers. And I had a promising career in industry. My company was bought out by Fidelity, and it just wasn't me. I had my stress was through the roof. I was a graduate student at the time, and I wanted to do something different. So about a little over 15 years ago, I took a major pay cut to work for the Department of Defense. Just something I wanted to do, wanted to try out. So after doing that, I moved down to the Patuxent River Naval Air Station. Anybody know where that's at? Yeah, a few of you do, all right. And I jumped right in on the V-22 Osprey program. That's the tilt rotor. That's the one that can fly like a plane, take off like a helicopter. The idea came out of the Iran hostage crisis, where they crashed helicopters trying to get people up. It still took 20, 30 years to make it happen. So it was a really interesting program to be on. And as a program manager, it was the best one I probably could have got on for my first gig. So for over 15 years now, I've been a program manager in one way, shape, or form for the Department of Defense. I told you I started with the V-22 Osprey. I did a 2-year stint at the Pentagon as a policy officer. So it really wasn't a PM thing, but I got talking to a bunch of people here this morning from Warner Robins who did something that was either EW, electronic warfare related, or maybe even TechSigint related. So that's what I did as a policy officer at the Pentagon. So I'm happy to say we put that in a better place. At least I think we put it in a better place. You may have different opinions. It's a problem that's been a problem for over 20 years. I'll say that much. And let's see. Otherwise, aside from the 2 years at the Pentagon and that first stint with Pax River, I've been bouncing around as a PM within the DoD for 15 years. I've done major acquisition programs, what we call ACAT 1, that's Acquisition Category 1, and also major systems acquisitions. And right now I'm doing a special interest acquisition. So I've seen quite a bit. I also did some project management in industry before I came here. So I'm also an adjunct professor, on and off, kind of more off than on. And let's see, published some manuscripts in the areas of knowledge management, data science, cyber intelligence, which were already mentioned. And I'm going to go into something different than what you've seen so far today. And contrary to popular belief, or Caroline, who's no longer here, who said we're going to talk about hacking elections and the people at Study Unite, spooks or whatever, we're not going to talk about that. What I'd like to talk about is what's being called adaptive acquisition frameworks for defense intelligence systems. Specifically, adaptive acquisition frameworks. And I'm going to go in a little later and show you what that means. But the long and short of it is, We've been doing programs in the DoD the old way for way too long. And we've leaned on industry to tell us we were doing it wrong for quite some time. And now we finally decided to do something about it. We're not recreating anything. We're just doing something adaptive, where we take the old way and try to make it work. So, here we go. So the old way. Now, I call it the old way, and it's not going to be gone for a little while. It's government. It takes a while. Understand that. But it's called JCIDS, the Joint Capabilities Integration and Development System. It was thought up specifically by the Pentagon, the intelligence community, as far as ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, didn't exist yet. That was still decades in the future. And we needed some kind of methodology to have programs to do major weapon systems. So I told you about the V-22 Osprey, perfect example. So anything that was tanks, battleships, fighter jets, this worked. This took you from a pre-development mentality all the way to sustainment. And yes, that took a long time. That probably worked in the 80s and the 70s and the 90s, but the way things are going these days, we need something faster. So that's the old DoD 5000. They came up with a DoD 8000 about 10 years ago, and it was short-lived. And it was specifically for information systems. They saw 10, 15 years ago that this just isn't working. That DoD proper for those types of programs are doing all right with the DoD 5000, but we need something else that addresses information systems. And for whatever reason, it was short-lived. My time at the Pentagon, all those years later, we still asked the question, what happened to the DoD 8000? Well, it just didn't catch on for some reason. And it was a shame. But a lot of people were still asking the question, why didn't it work? And it addressed the technical needs, because that was a problem. Specifically, when you look at areas, software and infrastructure. There was a program that made 60 Minutes about 8 years ago that had a lot of negative responses for whistleblowing and things like that. The reason it got there was because they were trying to do technical infrastructure, and if you're all familiar with Moore's Law, this is kind of an adaptation of Moore's Law, where you're planning it today and it's already obsolete by next year, tomorrow, whatever. So how do you work with that? When industry can be right on top of it, but you're already obsolete. You already know it's obsolete. What do? You have to come up with something. And when we're talking about the DoD 8000, that was over 10 years ago now. We're seeing an interesting trend in how we're going about things, where we're looking at AWS, Amazon, and it did look like Amazon was going to be the big winner there for a while. Some parts of the intelligence community are going that way. And there's still some parts of the intelligence community that have to make up their mind, which will probably happen in the next 2 years. But a big curveball happened in October, where the Pentagon awarded a contract to Microsoft for Azure. A lot of people didn't see that coming. And I don't think Jeff Bezos saw that coming either. The last I heard is that the federal judge put a pause on the contract because he's trying to say, well, he owns the Washington Post. He's trying to say that the president hates the Washington Post, therefore that's why he didn't win the contract. So it's a bad excuse in my opinion, and hopefully they can lift that pause and get work done on that contract. But interestingly enough, that's where we're at. We're looking at industry. What kind of security clearance does Jeff Bezos have? He doesn't have one. All right, exactly. It's funny that we're even thinking in that direction, but it is the way to go. The whole cloud mentality is a star topology, and where do you stop? So, going to the next slide. All right, I'm going to give you the simplified version of the JCID model, because I'm going to show you the not so simplified version right here in a bit. The idea is, in the initial capabilities document with your material development decision, you come up with an idea. You come up with a need, and it needs to happen. All right, so up until milestone A, that's where you're thinking this up. You get into milestone A, that's pre-development work, and I'm following these triangles, by the way. So that's A, you're dreaming it up, you're gonna see if it can even be developed. By milestone B, that's a big deal. Now you need to start developing, you need to have a contract awarded, and yeah. So, and the idea is when you get that milestone C, and a lot of places don't even do milestone Cs that much anymore, but the idea is that you're in operations, you're sustaining. And so on the right-hand side, I put this in here because this is also how it's supposed to work. This Venn diagram, so the blue one is the JSIDS process, which I gave you an idea of. The acquisition process, that's me, the PM. And this reddish one is the PPBE, that's the budgeting for policy and programming execution. That's where you get your funding. And I can say that I was part of it when I was down at the Pentagon, where we put in an issue paper for TechSIGINT, and we were successful. But anyway, that's the old way. That's the simplified way. I'm going to show you the not so simplified way. Yeah. Does that look complicated? Okay. We call this the horse blanket. Can you see why? It's long enough, it's colorful enough, right? But the same idea here. Let's see if I can lift this up. Milestone A, milestone B, milestone C. Same idea. There you go. Got it? All right. You could, at the time, if you follow the instructions on the back, you could send an email to Defense Acquisition University. You could get your own copy if you signed up for one of their courses. Now they don't do that. They email you one, and it's now a PowerPoint of, it's like over 200 slides. You have to print it out and tape them together. Right? They figured out that they're spending way too much money on these things, and it's too much color and everything. Anyway, did that look complicated? Because it is. And again, it's okay, it's great actually, if you're doing major acquisitions. Software is not a major acquisition. Infrastructure, not a major acquisition. Or at least we don't think. Here's the new way. They came up with the idea of instead of trying to do something new, as I said earlier, to do something called the DoD 5000 Adaptive Acquisition Framework, that keyword adaptive. Don't change it, bend it. They started talking about it in 2019. Some of you may have already saw it briefed or something. That's a good question. Has anybody had a briefing on this so far? One guy. Two. Okay, good. So they started talking about it in 2019, that it's a possibility, that they're planning it, it's going to happen. One of them was signed, I think, in December of 2019. The others kind of spilled into calendar year 2020. And it borrows from the industry methodologies such as Agile and DevSecOps, or DevOps if you want to call it DevOps. The idea, and I've been hearing this with the program I'm managing right now, I've been hearing this for the last year and a half. Why aren't you doing DevOps? It's a modernization program. It's a lot of software. It's mostly software. So why aren't you doing it? Well, it's government. I can't do it. Now I can. So borrowing the Agile and DevOps ideas, they went into certain areas that they thought they needed to adapt into. And they took the choose your own adventure approach. Who remembers the choose your own adventure books? Okay. You're old if you remember that, by the way. Yeah. So the areas that they looked at were urgent capability acquisition, middle tier of acquisition. That's the rapid prototyping and rapid fielding approach. And they're, again, really borrowing from DevOps, where you plan it as you do it. And the major capability acquisition, software acquisition pathway, which is what I'm going to talk the most about today, defense business systems, and the acquisition of services. So here we are. That looks fun, doesn't it? If we look on the right, what's interesting here is that they only have 3 set up for operations and sustainment. That's not saying that only 3 are going to do that. You have to kind of look in the process here, such as the software acquisition. But I'll start with the top. Urgent capability, that's exactly what that sounds like. You need something urgent, you need to do it quickly. The middle tier of acquisition, that's the one that got signed in December. And a lot of people didn't even know the software one was coming. They thought this was going to do that software for them. But that's the idea. DevOps, plan it, do it. The major capability acquisition, now this models the old DoD 5000 the most. It's ultimately saying that you're an Osprey, you're a fighter jet, you're whatever. This fits you, this fits the old way. So we're going to bring the old way into the new way. with this. And notice you have an IOC and an FOC that stands for final operating capability and initial operating capability. And that's a big deal in the government because that's how you test. When you bring in your system engineers, the people we used to have at JITC down at Fort Huachuca, that's not so much them anymore. They had some badness happen in the last 3 years. I won't get into that. But yeah, that's how you did things. You had them test. You had external validation come in and prove that you exist. And this is the only one that really takes the IOC and FOC. That's a big change from the way we were doing things. I'm going to go into software acquisition a bit more on the next slide. However, I'll point out that the spins. So any of you guys who have done Agile, DevSecOps, spins, sprints, you're doing iterations. And that's what they're getting at here. Iteration 1, iteration 2, you're not really done. You just move on to the next iteration. And some acronyms here. Minimal viable product, that is basically you working with your customer to say, what's the minimum thing that we can offer that still shows value and that we can move on to the next iteration. And the minimal viable capability release is what you come up with after that. The RN is basically, the N means you just keep going. Defense business systems, believe it or not, they have this. And, well, we still have business systems. They felt that there was a need to have one just for business systems and acquisition of services. This is basically saying, if you look at a lot of places, especially in intelligence, they're not developing things. They're hiring bodies to get it done so much. This is for them. And you can build your contracts around that. Wanted to point out the red arrows on the side for cybersecurity. If you're wondering what that's about, it's ultimately saying that, hey, you people in cybersecurity, you're not the special snowflakes that you might think you are, okay? That this applies to you too. And I'll go off on a bit of a sidebar. When I did my dissertation a long time ago, one of the questions I asked a lot of the cyber experts was about contracts. And I was thinking, with someone who's knowledgeable in contracts but not so much cybersecurity, that there would be a sizable difference. They all said no. No real differences. So let's go to the next slide. OK, I'll take a closer look at the software acquisition. I already pointed out the MVP and the MVCR, but it looks a lot like DevOps and Agile, doesn't it? OK, so the 0 and the 1, planning, execution. As you're planning it, you're executing it. As you're developing it, you're sustaining it. Similar idea. And really, I covered a lot of this already, but you get into the areas of you're still testing, you have your pipeline, you're doing your ATO, that's your availability to operate. That's a technical jargon to say that your servers and all your data center stuff are up to snuff to do all of this. And of course, your acquisition strategy, that's a big deal. And that takes a lot of vetting, but here again, that's the idea. If you read these policies, they're getting at 6 months. And the program I have right now, working with our customer, we all feel 6 months is way too short. We're looking at more like 2 years or 3 years. And as you go out, 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, it's 6 months is just too crazy. But there are going to be software programs out there that this works for. And I think it's just going to be a matter of us. We're pre-milestone B, so we're just going to need to impress a lot of people above us that our overseers to let us do this in 3 or 2 years. And okay, I covered a lot here, and I know this is a bit of a departure from what you were talking about this morning with cyber. And do you have any questions? Bring one over here.
Yes, sir. The Undersecretary of Defense for, I believe it was AT&L, Acquisition Technology and Logistics, recently signed a memo mandating the implementation of CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do you see that potentially impacting the acquisition process?
I'm not on top of that, but they're A and S now. They're not AT and L. I don't know. They reorged about 3 years ago.
Okay.
So they're A and S now. I don't see any major impact from what I know of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
None?
I just don't. In fact, I think it's supposed to work with it.
Could we go back a couple of slides where you had the 5-tiered breakdown?
This one?
Yeah, that one. So with this new adaptive framework you're talking about, basically each of these different tiers, so to speak, represent different subject matters, I guess. So you said major capability was basically the old one where you're focusing on like physical outputs and things like that.
Yeah.
So the business ones for business and things like that. So what would be the, could you just run down all those, like what would be a good example of urgent capability, middle tier, and things like that?
Oh, an example of each one?
Yeah.
Urgent would be something that you need in the field, a capability that you don't have, that you're at wartime, that you need to hurry up and understand and build. You need it soon. 2 years. 2 years is pretty quick in the government. I have some other people who would probably agree with me. Middle tier of acquisition, that one's still waiting to see what the face of that one is. That is, it's somewhere between software acquisition. As I said earlier, a lot of people mistook it for software acquisition and didn't realize there was a software acquisition model coming. But similar idea that more of a research and scientific approach where you need to build something, test something, prove it exists, and prove that it'll work, and then you field it. Similar idea there, again, in the field. Major capability acquisition, that's the one I said where that's where the old way is going to pretty much take over into this, so your battleships, your fighter jets, those type of things. Software acquisition, just that, software, anything. We have a lot of software needs in the DoD of modernization codes that need to be updated. We have disparate systems that don't even talk to each other, so that's where this comes in. Defense business systems, anywhere from travel systems, so if I pretend that if they were paying me to come down to here, I have to put in a claimer to get my money back, they have systems for that. Travel agents systems, stuff like that, things that get you paid. That's business systems. And acquisition services, there again, this is a situation where you're not delivering anything, you're buying people to do it. All right, so there's a term, IDIQ, indefinite quantity, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity within the government, you guys know it. And that's where I think where that would fit in, where you want an outcome, and you don't know what you need to have it make it happen. Does it take 10 people to do it? Does it take 20 people to do it? You don't know, you don't care really. This just fits that.
All right, thank you.
Sure. Okay.
So I kind of have a comment and then a question.
Sure.
Okay. So, and I'm glad you're back on this slide.
Okay.
So this slide there on the left-hand side where it shows the cybersecurity, I sort of had the, I guess, pleasure, I'll call it, of working in an ACAP-1 program.
Okay.
And one of the biggest challenges was, I believe what that's depicting is that cybersecurity is resident in all of those different types of acquisition programs.
Yes, I'd agree.
But even more importantly, cybersecurity exists from the very beginning to the end, right? And that is why NIST came out with the risk management framework.
Okay.
It was even called a security development life cycle. And the intent is to sort of map the multiple stages of the risk management framework on top of the acquisition framework, so you would know, oh, okay, during this phase of acquisition, we should be doing this as far as cybersecurity goes. During this phase of acquisition, we do this. What I experienced in my previous life of trying to deal with it is it was very difficult for the two communities, the acquisition community and the cybersecurity community, to really come together and understand that was the intent. They both saw each other as separate functions, right?
Right.
So that was just a comment to kind of expand a little bit more
Right.
cybersecurity role.
Right, and you're referring to was it the RMF under NIST that
Yes.
came out,
Yes.
what, about 4 or 5 years ago?
Initially, it was like in 2008.
And they came up with, oh, yes.
But it took quite a while before government even really started
Right.
adopting it.
Right, I know what you're talking about.
Okay.
And that's what I was getting at, that I think a lot of people just made assumptions that cybersecurity is just that much different, and they're not. They're just, there's a different approach, or they need to be in every approach, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then the other question kind of had to deal with when you talked about 6 months not enough, right?
Yeah.
So again, I've seen acquisition programs trying to implement more of an agile process with the different sprints, iterations, and whatnot. And I think that goal of 6 months, at least what I have seen, is it does work and can be successful, but in, I'll call it minor things. For instance, software. When you're having to do patching of existing applications and things, that 6 month cycle is achievable. But when you're trying to develop new
Yes.
capabilities,
Yes.
6 months is a bit aggressive.
Yeah. Yeah. That also assumes that you have a stable contract situation, too. If you don't have that, then 6 months is probably not attainable. Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else? One back. I see another one back here.
Sort of a follow-up on both his conversation and the thing I asked. Sort of a follow-up between both the conversation he was having and my earlier question. I see on there you have two different time frames for the first two, the middle tier and urgent. Is there a set time frame for any of the others, or is it just whatever the contract holds, really?
No, I think you, with the bottom three, especially the software acquisition, that you do it until they say don't do it anymore.
Gotcha.
We'll fund you for the next 10 years or whatever, and then when you're no longer relevant, or some other program took over that's doing better work than you, or is just more up with the times, that's what it's getting at. With the business systems, I think you're just always going to have it. You'll probably have to award a new contract every once in a while. Same idea.
So thank you.
Sure. Any additional questions?
Quinn, is there somewhere this framework works more effectively than other places? And is there any way you could walk us through an example if you have one off the top of your head?
Okay, so
where
the
it has
framework,
worked or failed?
as I mentioned, these are just getting signed. One was signed in December, one in January. I'm not sure about the others, but if they were just signed within the last month, within February. No, I really can't give you any examples. I mean, I can give you examples of how industry has used this, and that's what the DoD really wants to get after. How do we make those things work together?
Yeah, it's interesting, but I'm wondering if there's if industry's already using this, is this something that's globally looked at? Is this something that can be, is it just for U.S. market space, or is this something that's going to be applied globally?
What I'm showing you is just for U.S. for the Department of Defense. However, there are similar ones out there. There's the European Union pooling and sharing. There's the one under NATO that's Smart Defense it's called. They have problems that we don't have. I mean, we're the biggest customer in the world. They don't have that problem. They have money issues. They have resource issues in general. So getting the NATO countries together to try to streamline things with their industries, same with the EU. Yeah, they are doing similar things. Of course, we're the U.S. We're going to make ours look bigger and better. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, sir. I had a question.
Sure.
You alluded earlier to the AWS and Azure governments going more towards cloud-based
Yeah.
computing. I know for acquisition of weapon systems, we have to adhere to the 50/50 law, maintaining core competencies of certain weapon systems. Do they apply the same thing to information systems?
So information systems is a vague term. So could you give me?
Well, I mean, if we're going to do a contract for
Okay.
Roughly $1 billion to either Amazon or Microsoft
Yeah.
for a certain capability that's very critical in
Yes.
terms of information tech,
Yeah. What
Is the government going to be mandated to comply with 50/50, where they have organic people supporting some of the infrastructure for that cloud-based computing, or is it going to be 100%?
I wouldn't say it's 50/50, and I wouldn't say it's 100%. It's maybe like 20/80, 30/70. Yeah, I mean, the examples we have now are very few. We only have one agency in the intelligence community doing it. We thought we would have the Pentagon using it, and well, we'll just have to see how that works out once that judge decides to lift that sanction. But I would suspect 70/30, 20/80, government to industry. Yeah. Anybody else? Got one over here.
I've worked in acquisitions before, and there's come times where we got into an iteration or gotten to a certain point where there's a cybersecurity requirement that drops, or a feature or need is changed within the iteration, and it was really hard to get those contractors to make those moves because the contract is written way before. Is the DoD doing anything to address those issues as far as like having more flexibility in the contracts for when the need arises?
There's a strong desire to do that. You have to look at every contract like it's a snowflake, because they all have their, even though they're contract types from fixed price, cost plus, whatever, they were all awarded to do something different. So the intent is that we find better contract situations, because 10 years ago we thought we came up with a better idea with net-centric capabilities, and the biggest issue there is that it awarded one contract and it kept that way. Now, what do you think can happen over 5 years with one contract, 7 years, 8 years, 9 years? Right, it can create a lot of problems. Every effort you try to fix it is probably not going to work. So there's a desire to get into here and have contracts that are like 5 years or shorter. I mean, if I was to use the business system example, you could keep doing this. You don't have to worry about an IOC or an FOC someday, but you would have to re-award the contract after 5 years. You'd have to recompete it. Yeah. Do you have any specific examples of contracts that you want to share? No. Okay. All right. No, I could say the look on his face. Yes, I've seen some real humdingers too, and again, you just have to look at why they're not working, and hope you can fix it the second time around. Yeah. Anybody else?
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Absolutely awesome. First class. Thank you very much.
Thank you.